We're going to get going. So if everyone wants to try and take their seat, or if you can't take your seat, then hang out at the back. So welcome to Curation Beyond the Buzz. Very good to have you all here today. I'm James Lever, the CEO and co-founder of Multilocal. We're a curation business. We provide curation as a service and work with Permutive, among others. And I'm very pleased to have my co-host here today, Joe, from Permutive. We've got a bunch of questions to go through and just talk about where curation is going and some real experts. But instead of me introducing them, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves. So why don't we just start straight with Sarah's next to me.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sara Badler, and I'm the Chief Advertising Officer at The Guardian.
Hey, I'm Joe, one of the co-founders and CEO at Permutive.
Lucia Mastromauro, recently, like 5 minutes ago, joined Deliveroo, so brand new, but yeah.
Hey everyone, Alex Gardner, Index Exchange CRO. Thank you for the invitation, James.
Thank you for coming. As you can see, this is a high-powered curation expertise panel. And so we're going to kick off. I'm actually going to ask Joe. So Permutive got into curation in the last 12 to 18 months. We're obviously, as Multilocal, we're working with Permutive a bit behind the scenes. But what I wanted to ask you is why curation and why now? What was the question that you had as a business that curation answered?
Yeah, I think if you really zoom out, what we've seen is kind of as Facebook, as Google lost third-party signals and third-party cookies and IDs, they effectively rebuilt all their systems to run on top of their own first-party data and first-party signals. And that's enabled PMax and Advantage Plus and others to deliver really amazing kind of incremental outcomes when you buy within Google, when you buy within Facebook. The problem we had on the open internet is we never went through that transition and change. So as an industry, we stayed stuck on deterministic IDs and cookies, and reach started to fall off a cliff face, and with that, incremental outcomes started to disappear. And everyone started to say, oh, well, the open internet doesn't perform. But it's not true when you look at what publishers have, the data, the first-party signals. There's all this amazing data to deliver performance and outcomes. It's 100% addressable, and the open internet can perform when you leverage those signals, but DSPs never rebuilt to absorb them and pick them up. And then you saw SSPs like Index come along, effectively providing the ability to push these signals in, to build on top of those signals, and effectively to deliver kind of complete reach on the open internet, but deliver incremental outcomes. So we see curation as a step change from a tech perspective on open internet and how it works.
Okay. And obviously the last 12 months, really, you guys have seen a huge explosion in your curation business. Where do you see it going over the next 12 months for you?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of growth. So media spend is growing about 3-4x year on year through it. It's actually growing even faster kind of quarter on quarter. I think what we're seeing is two layers. One is kind of agencies, brands starting to adopt more of these signals and buying against these deal IDs in a more clean path. But then also kind of you have platforms like Index, where we've built a whole collaboration suite on top of Index and the technology there, so advertisers can bring their own data, their own conversion signals, and start to optimize and leverage AI within kind of those environments to deliver better, broader outcomes. And that's driving even more revenue growth in media spend for our publishers downstream.
Yeah, which is awesome to see. So bringing it to publishers. Sara, Guardian were actually quite early to get into curation relative to other publishers, and we've seen publishers over the last couple of years on a bit of a journey with curation. As a publisher who's been playing with curation for a while, what does success look like for you and your team over the next 12 months?
I think, we've been doing curation, but I don't think we've truly known what it is. It's definitely been more of the SSPs have kind of led the charge of, here's what you're doing, and this is how publishers participate. I think over the next 12 months, we're going to see us hopefully doing it with you guys and being able to work with advertisers on what it looks like for them to have curated deals in our marketplace. So I think the next 12 months for us specifically is like from a global perspective, and this is just what our programmatic team is working on now is how do we curate deals, one, across the world, and then also use special audience and segments that actually scale.
And are you, obviously you're in the US, are you collaborating with Curation across your US and UK teams?
Yes, so as of recently, the US is overseeing the global programmatic business. So we're going to be working really closely with our UK team and very closely with also our Australia team as well to curate deals. And it was actually announced last week, and we're just super excited about it.
Congratulations. Brilliant. Does anyone on the panel have any questions for Sara or Joe before I move on? No, perfect. Okay. So, Lucia, you are, as you said, you're new. So we're going to go gentle on Lucia because she's only been in role for.
Can I can I phone a friend?
Yeah, there's Fergal down there is going to jump up if it gets too difficult. But actually, curation is really interesting as an opportunity for a company like Deliveroo because there's both the opportunity to monetize your own audience, but also to drive data and monetize data as well. New in role, early days, I know, but where do you see the big focus of your job and how do you see that evolving?
I mean, I'm new to Deliveroo, but Deliveroo is not new to ads. And the team that has built a tremendous, brilliant infrastructure from the ground up, very close to the experience, which is scaling pretty nicely. There is a lot of opportunity, though, to fine-tune and scale how we work with brands, especially more the larger brands, more on the branding experience. It is a platform that does really well for performance. It's a platform that does very well for in the moment, the mindset of the customer, the engagement. We know quite a lot about our consumers, and pairing them with the right product in the moment is very valuable. But on the other front, there is an entire ecosystem in the advertising space transforming itself, as you have well described. I've been in ad tech for a very long time, and I've been a publisher before at King. The challenge is how do you price just on media versus data without necessarily being close to your media. Historically, the erosion of value from a publisher perspective was massive. And many players have capitalized on that, but the independent ecosystem have really suffered from the inability of bringing those two together. So I'm very excited, actually, of the new possibilities and how, and looking deep into how we redesign an experience that leverage the richness of the data, the richness of the media, and the love that we have from our consumers.
Brilliant. Exciting times ahead. Congratulations. Actually, Alex, I've got a good question for you, but I hope. But before we actually get there, I'd love to just ask you more about sort of enterprise data and where you see that heading, because obviously you, as a leading SSP, you guys are really driving conversations there.
I mean, we think about it in a few different dimensions. And a few folks kind of touched on this in the panel already, which is how do we reduce sort of like the friction to access and simplify the process for parties to the transaction. Data can sit in a lot of kind of disparate locations, and so how do we bring that to bear in the context of a transaction, enhance the sort of value or perceived value of that inventory by augmenting it with data. And so up until the point that we started to really examine this, it just felt disparate and a little bit complicated. And so for us, it's really about simplification, abstracting away sort of those obstacles and those challenges within sort of a marketplace or curated environment. And it's access, ease, simplicity, and that may seem trivial, but up until more recently, it's been quite complex and complicated. And I think that's inherently the value proposition of a platform like us, is to bring these things together. It's why we kind of named the product marketplaces, because we want to bring these various call it disparate assets together in a place that is both economically viable for each of the participants and also, really simple in terms of access and execution.
Brilliant, thank you. Alex, you obviously we work closely with Index. They're one of the key SSPs that we work with, and we were very pleased when Index jumped into Curation probably 2 years ago now. It was slightly after the others, but they came in with a phenomenal platform, so they made up for that. But Andrew, more recently, has started to talk about sell-side decisioning. What's behind that, and what does that signal about where you see this whole thing going?
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts. We were a little bit late, but we like to say that, anytime we're late to the party, we bring the beer, or the rosé, as the case may be. We actually began this journey, it was probably late 17, early 18, when we were launch partners with Target for their Roundel offering. And this was a very, I would say, early foray into commerce media. And through that experience, we learned an absolute ton. It was a little bit clunky, it was a little bit complicated. The process of enabling supply for their data, which was incredibly rich across their, I think, 200 million guests. Like, it was a really, really valuable opportunity. But it was challenging. It was challenging to get off the ground. So fast forward 5-6 years, and we had a good amount of time to really think deeply as to how we could do this better. And so, although it feels like we just kind of showed up roughly 2 years ago, that was sort of the culmination of many years of discovery and investigation and product innovation to kind of bring something to market that we thought addressed the challenges that we experienced historically. One slight correction that I would make is that we don't actually do curation ourselves. We facilitate curators on our platform, and so we sort of address some of the points that I'd made earlier around providing simplicity and ease of access to what is arguably a fairly complex process. Where I would distinguish curation from sell-side decisioning is you can think of curation as a very kind of specific business model. Whereas sell-side decisioning is sort of like a broader paradigm shift that we see happening within the programmatic ecosystem. Whereas historically we've seen value creation on the DSP side, and whether it's the data activation or the actual algorithmic decisioning for a given campaign, that has historically existed solely on the demand side. What we see as an opportunity in sell-side decisioning is actually bringing a lot of those capabilities upstream to the sell side of the transaction. And not only kind of just moving from one column to another, but actually improving the economics around that, and also improving fundamentally the performance. We are inherently bound to QPS constraints from all the various DSPs, and so if we eliminate that one constraint, we're arguably able to match audiences much more broadly across the 500 billion plus requests that we see on a daily basis on our platform. And so that's sort of the inspiration for what we're trying to bring to the market.
It's great to see, and you've got some lots of people are innovating on your platform now since you launched it, and you guys are really taking a lead there. Are there any particular sort of innovations that you're seeing that you look at and go, that's a good pointer for where things are heading?
Yeah, there's a few really, really interesting things happening. This concept of containerization of technologies on our edge is something we're particularly excited about. One of the biggest barriers to entry for a lot of the companies that we see entering this space is the cost, the infrastructure cost. GCP, Azure, AWS, these are incredibly costly costs of entry. If we can help alleviate those costs by giving capacity, which we have, thankfully we've built pretty sizable infrastructure footprint over the last 2 decades. If we can provision some of that to these companies, we see an opportunity to remove a significant barrier to entry. And what we think that potentially translates to is a lot more diversification of demand sources within the ecosystem, which we think is just generally healthy. That particular dimension we find is really, really exciting.
I think we've seen some of that play out in the sense that I think the first wave of curation, right, was people basically taking third-party data and applying it sell side, which like doesn't solve any of the fundamental issues in our ecosystem, which is like, what do you do when there's no ID? What's really nice is kind of the decisioning move sell side is like publishers have this very broad base of addressable signals which previously couldn't be used, and now you can decision there versus the DSP, which doesn't even see the majority of impressions. But I think when you dig into like use cases like retail media, what we see is really effective is like retail media has a limit on its inventory, it needs to move full funnel. All of a sudden, someone like a Deliveroo can match their data across the publisher ecosystem and start to deliver more full funnel advertising opportunities. So we think kind of that sell-side decisioning basically reconfigures where every partner plays in the stack and moves a lot of these folk into to deeper relationships with publishers in the data.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for us as a publisher is we're able to, one, be able to scale those. And with all the different ID solutions, we're able to kind of figure out what's best for each client, how it works. On the other side of it, for publishers, it is, there's a queue. And essentially, we have to kind of prioritize what makes the most sense. And because there are so many of them and product resources are constrained, it's trying to figure out, like, which ones make the most sense. And to Alex's earlier point about, like, Roundel, which I very much remember, and still is there. But there's a lot of these, and there's a lot of clients that want to do specific curated marketplaces. And it's how do we do all of them, or prioritize them, or figure out like what makes the most sense as a publisher.
Yeah, it's interesting. And
Can I add something? So beyond strengthening the sell side, I think there is a very important element, which is it's privacy friendly. Like not long ago in this industry, it was really difficult to, work with data, make sure that your data didn't really leak without enabling you to keep control of it, and so on. So that the latest developments, I think, the industry is innovating at a really tremendous pace and creating more opportunities, not simply for publishers to regain more control, but for consumers to be able to have a better experience as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point. For companies that own first-party data, Curation actually provides proper security of their data and reduces any possibility for leakage, which is why we're seeing a lot of companies coming in and talking about that now. I'm going to bring back Sara.
Yes.
So I was going to ask just after you finish, but with your curation strategy, has it helped you, has it enabled you to go deeper in your relationships with any agencies or advertisers over the last 12 months?
Definitely. I think the expertise that some of the clients have and some of the agencies put together is kind of it's an awesome thing. It's really like just working more strategically together, of figuring it out and what makes the most sense. It also is like a conversation that you can be honest about and say, like, this doesn't make sense for this specific line of business or whatever that looks like. I do think that there's still this like stress with clients and the agencies of like, to your point also, of trying to like bring things in-house and try to figure out like how we do that. And there's major cost constraints with that. And then also it's just how much each person can kind of take on to do it. But I think from a relationship perspective, it's definitely helpful. And I think the other kind of cool thing about it is now that we figured out like some of the ad tech pieces, it's like we can do more creative things with it. So it's not just about setting up and scaling a curated marketplace of a deal ID. It's how do you do that with other formats, and how do you do that with bigger things of a partnership that is part of an event or part of podcasting or things like that, which has helped us scale.
That's awesome. And do you find with agencies, in your conversations with agencies, that they want to take it on, or are they happy for you guys to drive the actual curation?
I mean, I think it's both. I think if agencies can do it for multiple clients and curate a marketplace that works and can scale, and it's easier and more efficient for them, obviously there's the biggest thing for agencies, I think, is time constraints. Yeah. So I think if you can do that, and that's great. I think that's harder for a publisher, because there's going to be a million times where a client says, well, I'm not reaching the right audience, or I'm not reaching my KPIs. And if you're lumped with a dozen other advertisers, it might not be as effective. But I think that's kind of case by case.
Interesting.
I can add a thought there if you like. coming from the agency world where I was most recently at, as you said, time is a major constraint within the agency ecosystem, but agencies are also looking to add value, right? They're and historically, most of their value comes from deep understanding the media and being able to leverage data effectively for clients. So I think agencies are kind of coming around to curation, but it's definitely a massive opportunity for them to fine-tune their proposition as well.
Lucia, as with your sort of previous agency hat on, and now coming into a brand, are there brands that you look at and you've noticed that you think are doing a really good job with their retail network and building out curation opportunities?
I mean, without naming names, what I'm seeing is really a very bubbly and vibrant ecosystem. My background is e-commerce consultancy, then joined eBay, then Google, then a publisher business within King, and seeing that evolution and some of the early challenges that I had and most people in similar seats at those times had. It was a lot of technology constraints. The ideas were there. They were like, if we could only. And within retail media these days, especially now that AI is advancing technology massively, I'm seeing a massive sort of a use cases realizing in reality, which was really interesting. The ad's no longer just a static or just a video, just something engaging. You can really bring forward that purchasing delivery to your consumer much easier.
Brilliant. Joe, over the you obviously work with a lot of publishers, and we've touched on some publishers. I've got Sara here, but how have you seen the conversation with publishers evolve over the last 12 months, and sort of where are we at this point in time?
Yeah, I think I would say like two layers to what we're seeing in curation with publishers. The first is publishers seeing it as a channel for their audiences and for their data. So historically, you had kind of direct sold PMP and then open marketplace. We've seen kind of curation as a new channel where publishers can distribute data. So that's been quite a significant change. Is like, how do you price? How do you go to market in that new layer for publishers? The second piece, though, is I think kind of curation is allowing publishers in many ways kind of regain their confidence around the proposition and programmatic. I think so much of the programmatic pipes have broken over the last 2 or 3 years, and what is a problem in a DSP gets blamed on the publisher downstream when it's actually the DSP technology has failed to adapt to changing ecosystem where IDs are no longer prevalent, and instead publisher signals are the dominant signal. Curation allows publishers to fill this huge addressability gap on the open internet, and with that, what we're seeing is publishers drive huge outcomes. So, for example, Sky in the UK, largest programmatic ad spender, put all their broadband mobile packages through kind of curated collaboration via Permutive and our publishers. Right now, those curated packages outperform Meta, they outperform Google, and in many instances are 3 to 4x better on incremental CPAs and sales. So actually, publishers in the open internet have so many rich signals, but ad tech and DSPs have been ignorant of those for so long, and curation has changed that. And with that, I think a lot of publishers have started to realize, hey, actually programmatic can work for us because we can prove performance in this, not just direct sold.
There's been another interesting, and Sara could speak to this probably more than I can, but a lot of publishers were very apprehensive about accepting curated demand. I think they saw it potentially as the sort of modern version of the ad network. They were perhaps relinquishing control. They were circumventing their own kind of direct sales channels. And so there was more resistance early on than I initially anticipated. The good news is that it didn't take too long for publishers to get comfortable. I'd like to think we had a hand in that. what I think also became sort of a realization is that a lot of what is happening on the sell side today in the context of curation existed previously within the DSP. It just happened non-transparently. You just couldn't actually see it all, and it came through as sort of aggregated demand through those connections. And I think that's one of the added benefits that we're now seeing through curation from the sell side is this level of transparency that just didn't exist previously. And as publishers have sort of come around to that realization, they've become a lot more comfortable, not only as participants within curation itself, but also as recipients of that curated demand, which is now, in many cases, more transparent, more controlled, and in fact, incremental to their existing demand complement, which is now purely additive, and I think really, really kind of a positive contribution to their overall monetization strategy.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that it's like almost a new bucket of inventory or demand. I think publishers are still trying to figure out, like, how do you calculate it? Like, what does it fall into? It doesn't fall into a, I mean, it does fall into a B&B, but, like, there was a point where, like, you would, at my old life, like, we called it, like, house deals because we just didn't totally know what it is. Now we know what it is, but it's more how do we deal with it? And then how do we speak to it in a really smart way to our clients for them to understand it and what's happening? Because otherwise, then they're just going to put more money, which is not a bad thing or a good thing, into the ad tech. And we want to make sure that they know that, like, we're delivering on what they're looking for.
Yeah, we've definitely, from our conversations, seen a massive change in the way publishers are engaging over the last, certainly the last few months. The journey to acceptance and now engagement is pretty significant.
I do think there is an issue, though, which I think agencies probably need to lean into a bit more, right? Which is, I do agree, in some ways it's more transparent, but if we're also really honest, there are a lot of dodgy players in the kind of broader ecosystem of curation. And I think kind of at an agency level, agencies believe, oh, if I buy a deal ID, that deal ID is going to be better working media to the publisher. It's a more direct connection. But it's hard to distinguish the fact that, like, today, a lot of these deal IDs to The Guardian look like open marketplace, right, and someone's repackaged The Guardian's inventory and arbitraged it. And I think kind of agencies need to lean in more heavily to demand transparency from the curation partners they work with on, am I actually buying a cleaner path, or am I buying a third-party data set which has been overlaid and arbitrage on publisher inventory?
Yeah.
And I think actually transparency is really interesting because, so, as Alex says, there's got to be a degree of sort of maturity when reviewing the transparency. A lot of the anger comes because it's transparent as opposed to completely unseen.
Yeah.
So we are rapidly running out of time. I'm going to ask everyone to sum up quickly, and then hopefully we got some questions from the audience if you guys have got time. So, Sarah, you start.
We like curated marketplaces. We also like transparency from a publisher perspective and want to try to figure out how we can do more of it.
Yeah, I think mine would be open internet performs and actually delivers better incremental sales and outcomes than the walled gardens do today. I would really kind of recommend folk lean in, though, to try and understand what are the signals and ways of buying which drive that versus don't.
From us at Deliveroo, we are in the early journey of doing a discovery and evolving our proposition, and definitely curation is top of the agenda.
We supremely believe in optionality, and that means that you can, curate and build within the DSP, or you can curate and build within the sell side. And we want to make sure that should you choose the latter, you have all the tools and resources and capabilities and access to premium supply that would align to those kind of expectations and requirements. And so that's kind of the stance that we've taken, and we've seen tremendous sort of value and growth on the heels of that. And so thank you for the partnership, and thank all of you for the partnership.
And thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much. My question comes from something that Joe had mentioned earlier. What can DSPs do to be part of this? If there was somebody on stage right now representing a DSP, what ideally would you have liked them to have said?
That's a great question. I think our journey with curation has been over the last 18 months, really. prior to that, we spent about 3 years knocking on doors at DSPs saying IDs are collapsing. They're available on less than 30% of the internet, which means outcomes and performance on open internet has fallen off a cliff face. You need to rebuild on top of publisher signals. And no DSP was willing to make the changes to their systems in order to support that. The SSPs did, and I suppose that would be my ask, is I think if DSPs open their pipes up to a new set of signals from publishers, there's a lot of optimization and power which can be kind of leveraged within the DSP. So that's what I would be most excited about.
Just a question. Just a question about the market and the adoption. Do you see some region adopting more curation compared to others?
I mean, I would say like usually, or not usually, but what I've seen is the U.S. is kind of leading, I would say, in a market perspective. But I also think that's just because of the scale of how many deals that were originally set up there, and is kind of rolling out to the UK and the rest of EMEA and et cetera. I don't know if you guys see the same.
No, I would totally agree. What I think is also happening, we sort of isolated a little bit around curators in particular, but even all the way up to the major holdco level, this notion of sell-side decisioning is sort of taking hold in all sorts of interesting ways, and that has global implications. I don't think that it's when you're talking to the heads of these major organizations who are thinking about how they can kind of harness more control and margin. Let's be honest. That's happening with global consideration. I don't think it's being isolated to any one specific market. And so there's sort of like a few different layers of this, but in that sort of the broadest sense, we're seeing adoption happen very widely. Certainly much faster in the US, but I don't think it's isolated.
Thank you. What are the main challenges you see happening with curation?
I think transparency is something that we talked a lot about, probably, but I think that's the biggest, can be an issue for us, is just we just don't know and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think transparency, I completely agree with. I think there needs to be a greater kind of level of that. I also think curation is in its infancy, right? Like most people are just doing the old school tactics, but doing it supply side. So really we're moving from like this deterministic era of IDs to a predictive era and built on top of publisher signals and AI, but actually like most of what happens is deterministic and kind of legacy. So I think like kind of some of the products from Index and others like enables us all to move forward. I think kind of hopefully over the next 2 years we see kind of the promise of curation rather than the repackaging of old school tactics.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we are very much coming to the end of phase 1 of curation, and sort of moving into quite a broad future about where it goes. Lots of different business models, lots of different innovations. So it's less, I think transparency is probably always a challenge, but that's not necessarily unique to curation. It's to the whole sort of programmatic ecosystem. I think there's very few challenges and just actually massive opportunities all over the place that I see right now. Any other questions? Oh.
This is for James. What are you most excited about next?
That's a tough one. I think for me, I look back at Cannes over the last few years, and I can sort of see what happens. A couple of years ago, we were talking to a lot of the DMPs, companies like Permutive, who we've started to work with subsequently. Last year, it felt very much like a publisher year, as publishers started to sort of feel their way. This year feels very much like a big data, enterprise data year. And I see what's going on over the next 12 months, 12, 24 months, and how companies like Deliveroo and others are grappling with the data asset they've got and how they can use curation to drive it forward.
I mean, someone mentioned it. I think we're very much in early innings. And so scaling the trajectory that we're on, I think, holds incredible promise and value for all participants. And so I think we've sort of, the train has very much left the station, and now it's like, how do we harness the full capability of what it is that is been initiated here? And I still think we're just in the very, as Joe mentioned, still in the very, very early stages. I think this has the potential of completely reshaping the dynamics of the marketplace.
Yeah, if I can add,
Yeah.
To build on what you said, I think, as I mentioned, just a few years ago, publishers were in a very difficult corner without really being able to not only properly monetize its media, but its audience. And the industry has evolved quite nicely to really flip that balance. Being new to a role that's a publisher-based role is a nice kind of a vibrant industry of new solutions, a lot of creativity into how to apply technology, so that's interesting as well.
Cool. Any other questions? Or I think these guys have probably all got to run as well. So, so with that, I'm just going to say thank you all very much for being on the panel. Thank you all for coming and listening and asking some great questions. We'll be around for another sort of 20, 30 minutes. People do have other questions to ask. Certainly anyone wearing pink hats will be around, and some of Joe's team as well. But otherwise, thank you, guys.
Thanks
and
for
that's it.
having us.